Good evening. This week's Parshas Terumah. The Baal Shem Tov asked, why is it that the Torah put the Hakomas HaMishkan? We know that Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the Har, and the pasuk says, Vayehi mimocharos, the day after Yom Kippur, he got the Solachti Kudvarecha, and there was the tzivui to build the Mishkan. Now the Mishkan stood for 479 years until Shlomo HaMelech actually built Bais Rishon, and it began its functioning and its service in Avodas Hashem. And it stood 39 years in the Midbar. The first year there was no Mishkan. And then it stood for 39 years and went into Eretz Yisrael and was in Eretz Yisrael for 440 years. 379 of those years it was in Shiloh, 369. It was in Shiloh, and that's why many times in Tanakh it's referred to as Mishkan Shiloh, because it was so long in Shiloh that the pasuk attributes and includes in its name the mentioning of the city Shiloh. Now, we finished with Mishpatim that the end of the Seder reverted back to Har Sinai and Kabbalas HaTorah, and right after the Nasa V'Nishma, we came into the actual binyan of the Mishkan. So the Baal Shem Tov said, why are those two next to each other? To teach us that when you are divinely inspired and you reach a crescendo of heightened ecstasy, because you are so enthused and so imbued with such spirit, his oirivis, you are picked up to such a point, you cannot leave it with that lofty level. You must inject immediately the machshavas, the ratzon, the inspiration into action. And as I say to you many times, people talk about undertaking this or that, and the point being that it shouldn't just be the most beautiful intention, but there has to be magnificent action. So says the Baal Shem Tov. Now, we know that the Mishkan, the concept of Mishkan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the pasuk says, "V'asu li migdosh v'shachanti b'socham." This week, etc. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "Make a Mishkan, and I'm going to dwell there." We know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in every spot of the world all the time. So, what do we need a designated Mishkan for v'shachanti b'socham, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reside, so to speak, with his Shekhinah? It's something that we have it everywhere. So what do we need it there? But the answer is that there's such a concept of tzimtzum, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in an undiluted way, if he would remain as he is, we could not live for a second. It's so strong, the Kedusha, we would just burst at the seams. We couldn't exist. So he was mitzamtzem. That means he minimized, and he brought into a state of a diluted action his entire spirituality, his entire tremendous Kedusha as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's called tzimtzum, and that's how the world was created. because without Tzimtzum, no Bria, no one, nothing in this world could last for even a second. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted that he be as great and powerful and dynamic his Shechina is, that it be brought in a specific place, the Mishkan, which was not like it exists worldwide and that he's in every place and in every corner and in every room and every house, but it should be much more intensified. And that became the vehicle for Klal Yisrael to bring korbanos, to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to be able to have Klal Yisrael have a medium, meaning a place that they could get closer and feel the intensification of the Shekhinah more than anywhere else. Now, there is a listing of material that was required. And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh asked the question that if the pasuk was listing it according to its value, and therefore gold is first, Zahav, Chesef, Unachoshes, first gold, then silver, then copper, Usachelas v'argaman v'tolah shoni, v'sheish v'izim, the hairs of the goats, shemen lamor, the oils which uvesamim l'shemen hamishcha, then why, after all of the listing, the very last thing put in is avnei shoyam va'avnei miluim, for the breastplate and for the apron? There were precious gems in it, whether it was sapphire, whether it was diamond. They had on the apron the avnei shoyam, and you had on the breastplate all of these precious stones. Now, if you're going in order of value, why do you put the avnei shoyam and the avnei miluim after? It should have been at the beginning, maybe even before the gold, because maybe it's more valuable than the actual gold was. So asks the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. And he answers and says that we know that there are really 5 sedras. It's 4.5 sedras. It's this sedra, Terumah, next week, Tetzaveh, a little of a portion of Kisisa, and then Vayakel Pekude, totally under the umbrella of Mishkan. And in Vayakel there is a pasuk that says V'hanesiim hevi'u, but there's no yud in the word nesiim. So the Medrash says, why is there no? Because you could then read it, V'hanoisim, those who carried, or V'hinosam, that they were carried. Why no yud? So the Medrash answers and says that because when Moshe Rabbeinu came to Klal Yisrael and said that they should make the Mishkan, and this is the list of items that we need, how much gold, how much silver, and everything, then the Nesiim said, you know what? You take from Klal Yisrael, the Nesiim were the princes of each tribe, each Shevet. They said, you collect from all of Klal Yisrael, and whatever is missing, we will give. Now that's a administrator's dream, that their budget in a yeshiva is $3 million, and they only could put together with the tuition and the donations $1 million, and then somebody walks in and says, okay, you're short the $2 million, here it is. It's his dream. But it was, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not happy with the attitude. Because, says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, the enthusiasm and the desirability should have been so unbelievable that they wouldn't have said, let's wait to the end and see what's... They would have run to participate and be part and parcel of this magnificent Hashros Hashchina here in this world with the building of the Mishkan. So says the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, because they did not run ahead and cherish the opportunity, therefore what they brought, which was the Avnei Shoyim and the Avnei Miluim, is listed last. That's why it's last. So says the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. But he answers two more answers. One answer, he says, that there was no exertion. The poor person who only could afford a little bit of oil, but he worked for the dollar to be able to buy the oil and have, that was with sweat and blood. And in Olam Hazeh, the only way that you can produce something that has value, because value doesn't just mean money, something that's cherished, something that is worked for, and maybe it didn't cost as much as the silver and the copper and the gold and everything else, but nevertheless, it is of great value to the person who worked with his sweat to buy the oil. So that is a second teretz that the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh says. Now, it really is interesting because the fact is that the Mishkan and everything that was built had to be through the effort. And that, later we're going to talk about the menorah. And the menorah, Moshe Rabbeinu with his Ruach HaKodesh and his power of Nevuah, he was able, as soon as he was told, make the Shulchan, make the Mizbeach HaNachoshes, do this, do that. All of these things were brand new. Yet he understood in a second, as soon as he was told what has to be done, all of the intricacies, he understood it. Yet it came to menorah, he had no idea what was doing. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu took a menorah and put it into the fire and showed him that this is what it looks like. And the Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu still, he couldn't comprehend, how do you make this menorah? And it had to be miksha. It had to be chiseled. They took a chunk of gold and it had to be chiseled out. You couldn't take the arms of the candelabra, of the menorah, and put it together. It had to be from one piece. And the Mefarshim explain that because to execute even an Olam Hazeh, the greatest level of something like the menorah, you need uveirachticha b'chol asher ta'aseh. The bracha comes to Klal Yisrael, and we always ask for bracha throughout Shemona Esrei, and we ask bracha throughout Tfilas and our Tilim and everything we do. But there is a Tanai in the pasuk, Asher Ta'aseh. A person has to work at developing and producing here in Olam Hazeh, even the ruchnius that he does, which is, you say it's not physical, it's all spiritual. So what is his physical work? Because that is a chelik of Olam Hazeh, that we have to work and effort and toil. And there was somebody who once asked a tzaddik, why his children, like Shabbos, didn't make much of a difference. Yet when he grew up with his brothers and sisters, no one could wait for Shabbos enough. And no one could enjoy the level of the Kedusha and the Reach, Me'en Olam Haba, of what Shabbos is. So the tzaddik says is because you did not have the children work at it. That means when your mother stood for 3 hours in the kitchen baking, kneading the challah, there was tremendous work that put into those challahs. And when at the end, because it was done l'shem Shabbos, l'shem Shamayim, that when the people ate the challah, there was like almost a ruchniistic taste. It was so heavenly, it was so luscious, it was so delicious. And the tastefulness could not be traded because it was mixed in with all the water and the flour and the physical elements, with that sweat and with the blood. And into it came all of the ruchnius that comes along with Misha Torah Erev Shabbos, Yochal B'Shabbos will have the benefits. And this doesn't mean simply eating a piece of challah. It means all that is embodied in the baking of the challah, because in your house you never ask them to bake a challah, to help with the foods, to shine their shoes, to do something to enhance, to uplift, to incorporate the taste of what Shabbos is. Now, there is a second answer why the menorah came out at the end of the story, that Moshe Rabbeinu never understood it, so Hashem told him, just take a chunk of gold and throw it in, and it came out. And some suggested, tzaddikim, that the reason that that was the one item that he could not accomplish himself was because inside of the menorah, when Aaron HaKohen lit the menorah, as I mentioned to you in the past, that he succeeded in bringing the Or HaGonos, which was the hidden light taken away after Adam HaRishon's Aveira, that he lost the light. And the light we have outside is not the real light. This is a substitute light. And when Mashiach will come, then we will have the benefit and we will reap the actual ruchnius of what that light is when it said, Vayehi Erev Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. And when Aaron went and lit the menorah, which was the 2,400 years after creation, that the world did not have the benefit of the Or HaGonos, he worked out that in his lighting and kindling of the menorah, as the Ramban in Parshas Baloscha says, that he saw that 1,600 years later was going to be the story of Hanukkah, and that they'd find the Pach Shel Shemen, and they will light it, and that from then on every Yid will have a menorah in his house with a mitzvah of Ner Hanukkah, that Yid lighting his menorah could bring the Or HaGonos, which was taken away from the world for almost 2,500 years, bring it back into the lighting of the menorah, and not only for him, but for every generation of Yidden afterwards when they were going to light the menorah. So anything that had the Or HaGonos in it could not be made by a human being. Moshe Rabbeinu, as big as he was, and he was the biggest human ever to live in the world, but he still was a human being, and as a human being, he could not make the menorah because it was going to be pure ruchni with the Or HaGonos in it. So no matter how he tried to understand and comprehend, it didn't help him, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the end told him just throw in the chunk of gold, and out came the divine menorah. Now, I was asked a question around a year ago after one of the shiurim. And I answered the woman that subsequent one of the shiurim, I'll take out 3 minutes to explain to you what you're asking. She waited patiently, I forgot, and 6 months later she asked me again. So I'm taking 3 minutes now to answer the question that she asked, to elucidate and clarify when I said why we say twice Ashrei in Shacharis. We know that there's nothing in davening that we repeat a second time. A tefillah, that means in Hodu we say Hashem tzavakos imanu mizgav lana lokei yasela Hashem Oshia melech yanenu v'yom korenu. We end up Yehi Chavod with Hashem Hoshia melech yanenu v'yom korenu. Then by Uval Etzion we say it again. But a complete tefillah like Ashrei, only we say it in the beginning, in the middle of Psukei Zimra, and we say it again after Shemona Esrei. And this Chosheva lady wanted to have an understanding why we repeat it twice. So the answer very simply is that davening is divided into 4 sections. We begin with the world of Asiya, we go into the world of Yetzirah, we go into then the world of Bria, and then into Shemona Esrei Atzilus. Everyone agrees that everything up until Baruch She'amar is the Olam Asiya. With the beginning of Baruch She'amar, we then go into the world of Yetzirah. Whether Hodu that we begin davening with is part of Asiya or Yetzirah, that's the difference of Nusach Sfard and Ashkenazim, that the Ashkenazim believe that it's part of Yetzirah, therefore we tuck it in after we say Baruch She'amar. And those who daven Sfard or Nusach Ari, they say Hodu before Baruch She'amar because they feel that it's still those Mikubolim who put the Arizal and the others who put that Nusach together felt that it's part of the Olam Asiya and not part of Yetzirah, which then would come after Baruch She'amar. So it's there. So in the world of Yetzirah, which is from Baruch She'amar through Yishtabach, we say certain things which are a build-up, and Ashrei is one of them. When we finish Yishtabach, the reason they put a Kaddish right there and Baruch Hu is to go from Yetzirah at the end of Yishtabach. Bria is a much higher elevated place. And to get to that place, you need a push over the top, and that is the Yehei Shmei Rabbah and the Baruch Hu. That's why the Mekubolim, the Kadmoinim, put in the Kaddish and the Baruch Hu right after Yishtabach to go from the Olam HaYetzirah to the Olam of Bria. Bria, we then go in after Bria, which is from the Baruch of Yotzer Or until Go'al Yisrael. We begin Shemona Esrei in the Olam of Atzilus, which is the highest, the 4th and the highest. There is a world higher than that called the Olam HaKeser. And when we say Hashem, Hashem, Keil Rachum V'chanun, the Yud Gimel Midas Arachmim, that is the Olam HaKeser, and so too the 4 times that we bow in Shemona Esrei, Baruch Atah Hashem, that is the Olam HaKeser. But coming down from Olam Atzilus Shemona Esrei, it's like a person's on the 20th step. He can't just come down without steps, so he's carried into the Tachnun, which is a conversation which I don't want to take the 20 minutes to discuss of what it accomplishes and where it is and how tzaddikim pull neshamas out of the mud from there, and that's why on Yom Tov and Shabbos we don't say it, or if a chosen's there or a bris is there, because that effectuates what Tachnun has to do without the saying of Tachnun, just the Simcha or the Shabbos itself. There's no Gehenim on Shabbos, so we don't have to pull them out. The tzaddikim don't have to have that hard job, as many tzaddikim used to say, that their saying of Tachnun was the biggest Mesiras Nefesh, and many of them came out soaking wet after they got done saying Tachnun, because of what goes on during Tachnun. But right after Tachnun, which is the Olam HaBriya, because we're stepping down from Atzilus, we go from the Olam HaBriya of Tachnun into the Olam of Yetzirah back to Ashrei, which is the biggest stepping stone of Yetzirah. And that's why even if someone comes into shul late, he's allowed to skip parts of Psukei de Zimra to catch up with the minyan. Now, after Yishtabach, he's not allowed to skip anything. That means even if he'll miss saying Shemona Esrei with the minyan, he cannot skip anything in there. But even in Psukei de Zimra, he has to say Baruch She'amar, Ashrei, and Yishtabach. A minimum. And somebody once asked the Chofetz Chaim why he has such trouble with Parnasa no matter what he does. It's such a fight, an uphill fight. So the Chofetz Chaim answered him and said, because you're skipping pieces of davening. In other words, some people, because they came in once in a year and they skipped half of Psukei de Zimra, they got used to it. They come in, they say Baruch Shamar Ashrei and Yishta, as if that's the whole davening. But the Chofetz Chaim said, because davening are the pieces of the puzzle put together exactly. That's why we're not allowed to add even one letter. Whether you daven Ashkenaz or you daven Sfardi, you daven Nuschari, one letter into the davening that's not there. Because it corresponds to like on a key that you have notches. One notch is out, it doesn't open the door. The tzinor of Parnasa needs every notch, and those are the words of davening. So the Chofetz Chaim said there is a heter. Once in a while, a person comes in, doesn't want to miss the Shemona Esrei, and same with the minyan, so he skips over. That if he does it every day, or he does it too often, he doesn't have the notches of the Parnasa, of the words that he needs necessary to put together the key to open up that tzinor of Parnasa. And Baruch Shamar ushers us into the oilam of Yetzirah, so you must say Baruch Shamar no matter what. Ashrei is the cornerstone of Psukei de Zimra. And Yishtabach is the siyam of the oilam HaYetzirah, which then carries you into the oilam HaBriya. So that's why we have twice Ashrei, the second one being the stepping stone and the cementing factor of the whole Psukei de Zimra, and after going from the Atzilus to Bria into Yetzirah. So I apologize to the audience, but I wanted to keep my word in answering the woman's question or request of clarification about Ashrei, why it's twice. Now, I want to say to you that Rashi brings that there were Gimel Terumos, 3 basic donations given besides some of the gold or the silver or the copper that were given in money to the Mishkan, The Gimel Terumah, says Rashi, one was the Terumah of the Mizbeach. That means all of the operational things happening, the korbanos, they had to be paid for. Where did you get the animal? You had to buy it from someone. And all the expenses of whatever was needed in the Mishkan was one of the Terumos. The second one was for the Kalim. That means that wasn't operational, that was the function and the actual building of the Mishkan itself, meaning the Kroshim, the Adonim, and the Mizbeach HaChitzon, Mizbeach HaNechoshes, Mizbeach HaZohav, which was in the Kodesh. And then the third Terumah, operational, building, and then the third one was for the Adonim. The Adonim were the sockets that the Kroshim were put into. And everyone asks, the Adonim was the lowly, that was in the ground, it wasn't like some tremendous, so why would they ask for a separate donation? The korbanos we understood, that was a function of the Mishkan. That was an integral part of everything they did every day, or the Ketoris, and the building had to be built. But Adonim to have its own distinct, specific, separate gift. So they answer basically that the Adonim were the sockets, and everything of that Mishkan stood by the strength of the sockets in the ground, that they were able to put the Kroshim into them to stand and to hold in their place. And a Yid has to know that whatever he builds, a house, a shul, a mikveh, the foundation has to be solid, not just the cement, but the kavanas, that when a person is building, just like when a sofer writes a Sefer Torah, he says before every letter, L'Shem Ksiva Sefer Torah, and he says, and he goes through what he's doing because it has to be L'Shem Shemayim. And especially when he writes a Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem's name, it has to be with the full power of kavana, not just the kavana to the maisa of the writing, but it has to be filled at a ruchniistic level each and every time. But that is springboarded by the kavana of what he does, and it's a reflection of how good was the foundation and the first day of building and doing. A person moves into a new house. Does he want to make sure there's room for orchim, there's a bedroom that a noira could sleep? Is it fashioned around what ruchnius it's going to have? He has to have a sforim room, and he has to have a dignified place where the sforim are kept, not just in boxes on the side. He wouldn't do that with his valuable bechers and his leichter and all that. That there has to be tremendous emphasis on the beginning. And since the entire Mishkan stood by the strength of the sockets, it gave equal attention, equal honor to the korbanos that have to be bought with money, and the korochim have to be bought with money and built. So too do the sockets, because every beginning by Klal Yisrael, a chos and kala get married. Does he start having a seder right away, or is it pushed off from the first week because he's so tired from the Sheva brachas and he's just starting married life? and getting this piece of furniture, that piece of... What about all the ruchnias that he wants to have for the next 75 years in that house with his new wife and the family that's to come? That represents the Adonim, and that's why it had Gimel Trumos, an equal Truma to the Korbanos and to the actual Mishkan. Now, the Chassam Sofer said in the name of his Rebbe, Reb Nosson Adler, we know that the Mizritcha Maggid said on Reb Nosson Adler that besides the neshama of the Baal Shem Tov, his Rebbe, that no one in that door had a neshama at the level of Reb Nosson Adler. Reb Nosson Adler, who was so big. You see what the Chassam Sofer writes about him with such glory and with such magnitude. Reb Nosson Adler took every Shabbos koyen. He was a koyen. He took koyen and maftir, just like the Rebnitzer Rebbe took shishi and maftir every single Shabbos. So he quoted his Rebbe, Reb Nosson Adler, and he said that we know that in the Aron, there was the Kodesh Kadoshim. Outside of that was the Kodesh that had three items, the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Mizbeach Hazov, which they were makter the Ketorah's on. And then there was the Azorah. So in the Kodesh HaKadoshim was only the Aron. And no one stepped in there except for the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. And the pasuk says that with the Aron, that the poles that they carried the Aron with, that lo yasuru mimenu, they were never allowed to be taken out of the rings of the Aron. Those poles, when they were put in, had to stay there forever. They were never taken out. Now, the actual Aron Kodesh had the Torah. So the Luchos, so the Torah represents the highest in Olam Hazeh that any person could achieve and do in terms of the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. But at the same token, he said, the poles represented the Tomchei Torah. That means the Torah was the Torah itself. But the poles were the Tomchei Torah, people who support the Torah, that are always part and parcel and crucial in the execution of, having Torah learned, you need support for the Torah. And that's the poles. Lo yasuru mimenu. But says Rav Nosson Adler, that the kruvim, which were the cherub-like images at the top of the kaporis, on top of the Aron, it was two childlike images with their wings upward, and they faced each other and they were looking down. They faced each other when Klal Yisrael was doing the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If Klal Yisrael was not, then the Kruvim were turned around. They were not facing each other. And it was a miraculous thing. No one came in and turned them around. This was done min hashamayim. So says Reb Nosson Adler that just like the Torah itself was what the essence of the Aron was, and that the poles were the Tomchei Torah, the children represented the Talmidei Chachamim who learned the Torah. And he asked and said, why would they have childlike faces? If I asked anyone who's listening to this shir, what image would you have on the kruvim inside the Aron if it represents Talmidei Chachamim? You would have an elderly man with a long beard, but not the faces of children. So said Reb Nosson Adler, Zechusa Yogein Aleinu, that it had the faces of children because it wanted, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted the exuberance and the thirst and the thriving and striving with that exuberance and excitement of children. And the reason that they looked at each other was because different Talmidei Chachamim have different opinions. And even though they have different opinions, you have to look at each other with respect and at an equal level. I always say to you, some people in a shul, they have this minhag, they have that minhag, and others tend to look down, like their shul is the shul with the proper hanhaga and everything. So, yeah, these other guys, they do this, they do that. They're looking down, they're condescending. But the kruvim that represented the Talmidei Chacham, that even if Talmidei Chacham have tremendous difference of opinion, but they still have to look at each other and see each other and respect the other opinion. And the reason, he said, Reb Nosson Adler, why their faces were downward, not looking straight into the face of the other, was because it had to be with humility. When you have humility and you have a difference of opinion, you can survive very well. But there has to be mutual respect. And if there's no respect, then no matter how you look at each other and what you say, there is a lacking in the totality of the inyan. Now, and I just parenthetically want to say that when Queen Victoria was in her, Lahavdil, in her 7th month, she went and took a trip from England to Germany. And the rule in England for thousands of years, 1800 years, 1500 years, is that if a queen gave birth, let's say, to a son, it had to be in England or one of its territories. But if it was out of the country completely, then that child could not heir the throne. He could not become the next king. And when she was in her 7th month, she took a trip to Germany, and she was in Frankfurt. And it just so happened because Lord Montefiore, who was a very wealthy, and he lent countries tons of money, even England, he had so much money. And he was there on a business deal, and she was somewhere else, and he decided that since he knew her very well, he lent the Bank of England lots of money, he was going to go visit her. And he came into the house where she was. They announced him, and she said, please let him come in. I'd like to say hello. And there was a terrible tumult in the house, the palace where she was staying. And he asked, what's everyone look so gloomy and so overwhelmed with? And they told him that the queen is in her 7th month and she feels labor pain. She took the trip because she felt pretty sure that she would never give birth there. But she was giving birth. So Moshe Montefiore said that in Frankfurt there is Rav Nosson Adler, who is a Baal Ruach HaKodesh. I'm going to run and I'm going to go in his carriage. Took him straight to Rav Nosson Adler, and he came in and told him what the problem was. And Rav Nosson Adler said that they should take her on a bed to a boat and go out to international waters, which was a certain amount of miles out from the shore, because if the baby's born, and it will be, he told them it will be a boy, that boy will become the King of England because he will have been born in international waters, and that's exactly what happened. And if you look at the chronicles in England, going back 200 years, and she appointed, Queen Victoria appointed him as chief rabbi of England. He never stepped foot into England, but he was, and he's still on the books as chief rabbi of England, only emeritus, since the other ones, Jacobowitz and Sachs and all the others, became chief rabbis. But he was the honorary chief rabbi of England, which she bestowed on him from royalty and majesty because of the suggestion and the succession to the throne of her son. But that's not Parshas Terumah. That's just because I'm quoting Reb Nosson Adler. I wanted to tell you the story. But that's what Reb Nosson Adler said about the need for kruvim and to be childlike. We're on top of the Aron Kodesh, on top of the Kapporos. Now, the Gemara says that when we talk about the Aron Kodesh, it had to be, the pasuk says, mi bayis u'michutz titzapenu. There had to be a gold box which was inserted into a wood box. And that wood box was then put into another gold box. That was the Aron. Mi bayis u'michutz. And so if someone saw the Aron, they saw the outside was complete gold, and the same thing was inside. But in between the two gold boxes was a box of wood. And the Gemara says that Kol Talmud Chacham she'eno tocho kabaro eno Talmud Chacham, that any Talmud Chacham, and this is from the Aron, that just like the inside had to be gold and the outside had to be gold, so too a Talmud Chacham has to be completely inwardly as he professes to be outwardly. Kol Talmud Chacham she'eno tocho kabaro eno Talmud Chacham. Now the Gemara in Brachas says the following occurrence. There was a Talmud who walked up to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, who was of the oldest and the most choshev of the Tanoim, and asked him a question: is myriad a reshus or is myriad a chov? We know that Shachris and Mincha has a halacha of chov, and even though we paskin till Mashiach that myriad is a reshus, that doesn't mean a reshus. Well, I can decide if I want to daven myriad, if I don't want to daven myriad. That Klal Yisrael 2,000 years ago accepted 100% that they will daven myriad, which is Yaakov Avinu, that we will daven myriad each and every day. So no one today has a choice. But the status of encasing myriad into the arena of chov only when Mashiach will come. So it says that there was a Talmud who walked up to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya in the Beis Medrash. Rabbi Gamliel, who was the Nasi, was about to begin a shir a few minutes later, because the Nasi said this shir. And this Talmud walked up to Rabbi Yehoshua and says, is myriad a chov or a reshus? And Rabbi Yehoshua answered, it's a reshus. And a minute later, Rabbi Gamliel walked in, and the same Talmud walked up to Rabbi Gamliel and said, is myriad a chov or a reshus? And he answered and said, it's a chov. So the Talmud said to Rabbi Gamliel, oh, but I just asked Rabbi Yehoshua, and Rabbi Yehoshua said it's only a reshus. And Rabbi Gamliel proceeded to go up to the lectern and begin the shir. Now the rule was if the Nasi talked to you, you had to stand, and you had no permission to sit back down until he gave you the permission to sit down. And Rabbi Gamliel, the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, says that Rabbi Gamliel began the shir, and he left Rabbi Yehoshua standing. And the tzibur was in an uproar. There were thousands there for the Nasi to say the daily shir, and there was an uproar because it was like Rabbi Gamliel was being mitzayer Rabbi Yehoshua, like he was upset that he held it was reshus and he held it's chov. And as a matter of fact, before when the Talmud asked him, he said, "Oh well, Rabbi Yehoshua." So Rabbi Gamliel asked him, "You taka hold it's a reshus?" So Rabbi Yehoshua said, "I can't deny it because I just got done saying it to the student who came over and asked me. I said it was a reshus." Anyway, he left him standing, and there was an uproar, and they said, "We are getting rid of Rabbi Gamliel as the Nasi, because this is the third time that he is being Mitzayer Rabbi Yehoshua this year." There was a shaila of when Yom Kippur came out, and Rabbi Gamliel held it's 10 days from a certain day from Rosh Hashanah, and then it's Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Yehoshua held it was the next day. So Rabbi Gamliel ordered Rabbi Yehoshua on the day that he held, Rabbi Yehoshua held it was Yom Kippur, to carry his money and his package and everything to him, which means it was like being Mechal Yom Kippur, but he had to accept the psak to show the tzibur that Rabbi Yehoshua was accepting the psak, even though he held differently of Rabbi Gamliel, because he was carrying his money on the day that he held was Yom Kippur. But he was giving in to Rabbi Gamliel, and he was keeping Yom Kippur the day that he said should be Yom Kippur. And then there was a story with Bechorus also. All three times, myriad, Yom Kippur, and Bechoros, Rabbi Yehoshua disagreed with Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Gamliel was really being mitzvah. He left him there standing. He's beginning a shir that would take 2 hours, and he was one of the oldest Tanoim, and he was just left him there standing. So we're getting rid of him. So the question was who they should appoint. So they said, well, they can't take Rabbi Akiva because he's doesn't have yichus, so we can't take this one. He's not rich enough, because if you're not rich enough and you're the Nasi, you have to go to Rome and represent the Yidden. And people who have money have the backbone and they have the confidence to be able to take their position and stand and defend it. So the Gemara says that they took Rav Elazar ben Azariah, because he was the 10th from Ezra with big yichus, and he was fabulously wealthy and had all the qualifications. So he said he'd like to go home and ask his wife her opinion if he should take it. And she said, well, if they kicked out Rabbi Gamliel today, they could kick you out tomorrow if you do take it. You're at their whim. You do something they don't like, they could kick you out. So he said, isn't it worthwhile to drink from a golden kos even one day? Meaning if I'm only Nasi one day, isn't it worth it to have that experience? But there was a problem. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was only 18 years old. And he looked like a youngster. And that's what we say in the Haggadah. Harei ani keven shivim shana, because he went to sleep that night looking like an 18-year-old, and he woke up with rows of silver hair, which made him look, and that's what he said, Harei ani keven shivim shana. I look like I'm 70, but I'm really only 18, and that's why Shmuel Hanavi, who was a Gilgal, lived 52 years to fill in the years of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. In other words, he lived 52 years, and he lived, of course, before Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. But he came in for the last 18 years to be able, those first 18 years was to be mashlim to an age of 70. Yemei Shenoseinu Shivim Shana. But, so Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became the Nasi. And now you'll understand why, talking about the Oren and a Talmud Chacham being Tochu Kabaro, I brought the story. Because the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became Nasi, there was a Shomer HaPesach. There was somebody who was watching the door of the Beis HaMedrash, and every day that Shomer HaPesach, who had Ruach HaKodesh, as the Chidushei Arim says, because he would take a look at a Talmud who wanted to come in, and if he saw on his face he didn't have Tocho Kabaro, that he was not inwardly, he may have acted more frum than he was, and privately he was living a different life, he couldn't go into the Beis HaMedrash. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah dismissed this shamus that was standing outside. And he said, anyone who wants to come learn, come. And that day, the Gemara says, they filled up 400 rows, safsolim, benches. Now, a bench could seat 5, a bench could seat 10. So 400, there was maybe 4,000 Talmidim who came in. Ve'ika diamri, says the Gemara, and there's an opinion, it was Sheva Meo, 700 rows. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Gamliel, who still lived there, he wasn't the Nasi anymore, Chol Shadaita de Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel became dejected and depressed. And he said, did I push away so much Torah learning from Klal Yisrael? Look at the thousands that came in one day. So they showed him a dream that night that there were a lot of barrels, but it was all filled with ashes. To tell him, yeah, it looks like there's thousands of Talmidim, but it's like big barrels with nothing in it. Like they're nothing to talk about. But the Gemara says Velohi, but really the truth is that's not what it was. It was only Kedeli Yitosev Daite de Rabbi Gamliel, only to calm Rabbi Gamliel down, because he thought he pushed away so much Torah, but the truth is he did, because they only showed him that dream to calm him down, that don't feel so bad, there wasn't much to all of these numbers, to their ability. So ask the Chidushei Arim, why was he down? He knew every day that he saw there were thousands being turned away. What, this was some earth-shattering revelation that he suddenly saw that there's thousands that are coming in? So answers the Chidushei Arim that he thought that if a Talmud was not Tocho Kabaro, inwardly as outwardly, and he came into the Beis HaMedrash, it would take him years to become a Tocho Kabaro. And here he saw them coming in the morning, and they left at the end of the day. Tocho Kabarim. Tocham Kabarim. That they were inwardly, they had changed. There was a metamorphosis that the Koisli Beis HaMedrash made such an impact and effect on them that they came. It didn't take the years that he thought it would take. It took one day of sitting in a Beis HaMedrash, being permeated and warmed up and uplifted and inspired with such kedusha and with such tahara that they became automatically tocham kabarim. And that's why Chol Shadaite the Rabban Gamliel, why he felt so bad. We have to work on ourselves to perfect the Tocham Kabarim, and that the Mishkan, which was the most lofty thing that was around, that uplifted Klal Yisrael, and we should find ourselves in the Koisli Beis HaMedrash and the Makomos HaKadoshos of Tzadikim and Nir, and that's how they say, Gabbai Moshe, Milsa Zutrasahi. The people who are near Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ata Yisrael Mo Hashem Elokecha Ki Im Liyira, that it easily is achieved. Have a good week. Bracha v'hatzlacha.